SBA basically closed the process for new applications. Here's where the confusion and frustration comes down, on the winding down of the program. And here's where we are really baffled as to the way and information that we have received from the SBA. First, on April 28th of this year, the SBA said that funding was exhausted. On May 6th, they set the deadline for loan modifications, appeals, and denials for reconsideration. Yet, on April the 11th, we were informed by the SBA that it had $1.3 billion of transferred funds from the American Rescue Plan and $1.2 billion available in regards to canceled loans. So we didn't understand that they gave the explanation on April the 28th that the SBA, that funding had been exhausted. They set a date of April 16th they sent out another notice on April 16th that all workable files have been processed. So what I'm confused about, we have a large number of small business owners that are in the process with their SBA EIDL loan, receiving information from the SBA that they've exhausted funding and that all workable files have been made, and yet they haven't been notified in regards to their individual cases. On June 22nd, applications couldn't be processed because of lack of funds, another statement made by the SBA. Yet, in June, on our staff call with Administrator Kelly, we were informed that $800 million remained in the EIDL program. There's frustration and anger out there. We have 41,000 applicants who have never received determinations. We have 125 applicants that have been approved that haven't received their funds. Now, I can tell you, I talk to my state workers all the time that handle the calls from the small business community. They're my frontline workers. And they're small business owners that are really frustrated. They've gotten inconsistent information from the SBA. They believe their applications have never been litigated, never been completed, and they want to know why. They want a straight answer. As I said earlier, the small business community is the growth engine of our country. It's where innovation takes place. But small business owners don't have the same deep pockets and resiliency. They need to know what is going on with their applications. And if they're ineligible, then declare them ineligible. Let them handle it or take an appeal. But don't leave them in the lurch. So I hope that this hearing will have an opportunity to get answers to those questions and that we can have the completion of the EIDL loan program done in a way that represents the values of our committee and a policy that we developed and values of the program that is so important to small businesses. I'm going to ask consent to put into the record letters that were written to Administrator Guzman on May 6, 2022 from Senator Van Hollen and myself, and July 15, 2022 from a group of senators headed by Senator Cornyn and myself in regards to our concerns as to why certain information was given to our constituents when we were told that there was money available. Administrator Kelly, thank you again for being here, and you may proceed.
My name is Patrick Kelly. I am the Associate Administrator of the Office of Capital Access at the SBA, and I have been since March 1st of 2021.
And this hearing in regards to how the EIDL program is being wound down, there is bipartisan interest to see it done right. So I want to get the numbers right because we had like 3.9 million loans that were given out. We think 41,000 people who are looking for determinations that have not yet been done. We've seen at times the SBA say that these are unworkable. So but to our knowledge, those 41,000 small businesses have not been informed as to their status. So they're sitting out there hoping that they're going to get a positive response, but they want a response. They want to move on with their life. They want to know whether they can or cannot access the funds. because they have to plan their businesses. And we believe there's 41,000 that are in that status. And then we had 125,000 small businesses that thought they were going to get their funds, thought they had been approved for the funds and haven't gotten their funds. And then they get notices that there's no funds available, but yet we've been told that there is money there. So the funds are there. So it seems like they're not getting accurate information, which is extremely frustrating. And they call our office, and they call your office, and they call every senator in this country with legitimate concerns. So can you clarify the numbers for us? How many applications are still pending? Are they workable or not workable? Why haven't the small businesses been notified? And are there applications that have been approved but have not been acted upon? And for what reason would that be?
Yes, I will get to all of that. So first, I just want to start up top with the 125,000 first, so we can address that. The 125,000 folks have obligated funds to them. They could close those today with the assistance of an SBA district office, directly themselves with the call center for the specific COVID EIDL program. But that money is theirs. We will not cancel those funds. Obviously, at some point, later this year, we will send out notice and start to see if folks want to seek this. Obviously, it's a loan product that has to be paid back. Obviously, very favorable terms, but still, nevertheless, a loan product. So at their discretion, each of those 125,000 can close that loan. So I welcome the opportunity to make sure that anybody in any of the offices is clear that those folks have money and can be funded. And
those funds are there?
Yes.
So there's no problem with lack of funds?
Correct. So, and that, I start there to then move to the 41,000 because prior to, I believe my testimony in the House was the week of the May 16th. And during my testimony, it was timely because we were in the period of time where applications received on or before May 6th. I indicated in the House that there were roughly 61,000 of those, 2/3 of which were roughly loan increase requests, and 1/3 of those were reconsiderations. And I said during that testimony that we would get to all of those files prior to May 16th. And we would decision those files. So, 38% of the 2/3, so if we're keeping track, 38% of 40,000 files were decisioned and were approved and obligated funds and either sit in that 125,000 bucket or have already closed their loan and been dispersed. With respect to the final third, the reconsiderations, I indicated at that time, and it held true, that reconsiderations are decisioned successfully, meaning you ask for a reconsideration, the SBA reconsiders it and says, you know what, on hindsight, you are correct. 2 out of 10 times, the SBA reverses a prior decision. It's important to understand that 92% of the 41,000 did receive a loan and a prior decision in 2021 regarding their increase request, or in 2022 had been indicated what documents they were missing, which is 1/3, or 2/3 of that number. And I realize I'm throwing a lot of data here, but as the chairman asked to get into the numbers, 2/3 of that number has either not filed taxes from 2019. So it's important to understand that you could file an extension and that the extension period of time told within the fall of 2020. So these are 2019 tax returns with no filing. There was a filing once in 2021 when the program resumed a historic practice in SBA programs. So to Senator Erst's comments about fraud, waste, and abuse, historically, the SBA has always validated tax verification through the 4506T process. The CARES Act required the SBA to forego that provision, and the Economic Aid Act replaced that. So in addition to not filing or filing late, there's a third category of filers who, upon learning that their increase request was not validated by the filing that they put forward for 2019, proffered an amended filing return that coincidentally coincided with the request that they were seeking. So it's really important to understand that, yes, there was communication challenges with trying to indicate, first, we are seeking all comers in the 5 months following the program's formal conclusion. 12/31/2021 was the last day that in the program, by law, anyone could submit a new application. As Chairman Cardin mentioned, since 92% of the loans, or 3.6 million from 2020, had from April of 2021 until May 6th of 2022 to seek a loan increase. And the reason I use the April timeframe instead of the September 2 million threshold is because the average loan increase was $200,000. So it is absolutely the case that these folks are frustrated. It should be mentioned that 75% of the 41,000 files are from NAICS codes that Congress indicated were not impaired by the pandemic. As you know, in the Economic Aid Act, Congress designated specific industry segments which was appropriate: hospitality, restaurants, et cetera. 75% of the remaining requests are from industries that were not designated as significantly impaired by the pandemic. I lent money for 6 years to small businesses for a community bank based in Wilmington, North Carolina. And the CEO of that company's line to us is the only two questions that a borrower cares about is, am I approved and when do I get my money? And so I understand that from a borrower's perspective, no is a suboptimal outcome. But given the fraud, waste, and abuse that this committee has highlighted for the last year and the reforms that the Economic Aid Act began and the Biden-Harris administration extended to address fraud, waste, and abuse, we cannot extend loans to folks who have not paid their taxes.
Yeah, I understand exactly, and we want you to verify or recognize during COVID-19 we gave relaxations on filing returns, so not all the documentation is there, and it's not always the small business owner's fault. They may very well be entitled, they just haven't been able to because of the pandemic to dot every I and cross every T. Mm-hmm. So I am interested in how many files today are there still open where the small business owner has not been informed. If you reject, they can file an appeal, so they have that right. But if you don't reject and they're in a sort of a open status, they don't know what the future has. How many EIDL applications are still pending where there hasn't been a finite answer given by the Small Business Administration?
So, Chairman Cardin, every single person, and I know this because we've worked with your staff, committee members' staffs on a daily basis, and my colleagues here from Legislative Affairs work on a daily basis. We receive email accounts, both your office and our office. And in those email accounts, and I read them daily, so I believe it or not, I read each one each day because it's an easy way for me in public service to have an impact that day. It's directly tangible. I can either help somebody unblock something, or I can, get to a solution. In each of those email correspondence, there is an indication by the borrower of multiple instances and several different times over the balance of however long they've been seeking a loan increase, of interaction and communication with SBA employees, either at the district office or directly with the loan officers themselves. So to say that they have not been notified of the challenges facing their files, I believe understates the totality of the circumstances. Where in the most recent cases, so since the program stopped considering reconsiderations and loan increase requests in May, the emails that come in are either, as I said, in the obligated funded category, in which we work then to assist them with how they can close that loan if they want to close that loan, or they are almost entirely in the category related to a tax issue. And so 41,000 is obviously a deafening amount of voices, because if you took 50 states and divided it by that, that's roughly 800 calls, right? So your colleague, Senator Van Hollen, on that staff call that you mentioned, referenced 1,200 calls, which at the time, if you did 50 by 1,200, that's roughly 61,000 when we had the call. And so it's totally understandable that your offices are frustrated, that the borrower who in 2020, the federal government allowed them to seek a loan product without any verification of whether they had filed taxes or could demonstrate the gross sales receipts number and the cost of goods sold number integral to the economic injury calculation. And they say to us collectively, but you gave me money, therefore I am eligible. And in the sense that their business is small, as I mentioned, the overwhelming majority of these are 10 or fewer employees, so they are by anybody's definition small, totally true. But in the sense that we can make a reasonable reassurance of repayment from the cash flow of the business and verify that they filed their taxes, we cannot do that.
So I understand what you're saying, and I think we're like two ships passing in the night. We're hearing from the borrowers that they requested additional information. They supplied that additional information. They didn't hear back from the SBA. Their application is still pending. They get notification there's no money available. Now they hear that money is available. Then they get notification that all files are unworkable, but they think their case is still pending. That's where the frustration is occurring, and we need to know the numbers. I'll come back on the second round.
You've heard a lot about people in our own states, and we've all been getting phone calls. And the issue for me is that there are people who applied for these loans who were told that things were going well. They were following up on all of the requested information, et cetera. And then finally to be told by the SBA that the program ran out of funds. And then the next thing they heard was that no, the issue for this particular applicant, I'm talking about an applicant called Mike Kai Health Corporation, which is a nonprofit organization that takes care of the healthcare needs. But the next time they hear is that they were actually in the situation where they have made exaggerated projections of 2021 expenses and did not file their 990 tax return. I don't know what that is. So they're getting two different pieces of information. So how are, what are they supposed to do? Because the second one sounds serious. When you're exaggerating your costs, that sounds like fraud. So what are they supposed to do? Because originally they were not told that they were in a situation where they had to deal with what sounds like fraud. So,
first off, yes, not filing your taxes is fraud. Yes, so it is a criminal offense. For this particular program, the 2019 return is the return that we're leveraging. Those returns needed to be filed, even with extensions, by the fall of 2020. So yes, and the reason there's a disconnect, I believe, and I work on this every day, and I just want to say for the committee, and it's important just to say personally, I come from a town, Manchester, Connecticut, where the median income is $61,000. It's under the national average. In my community, behind us was a dentist. Across from us was a steak owner, and around the corner was a franchise owner for Dairy Queen, obviously our favorite. So I want people to get capital, and as does the administrator. But the reason that they cannot get capital and were able and believe that they are eligible in the first place is because they did get capital in 2020, even with those issues. And so it's important to understand that original choice with respect to the tax filings has a ripple through the process.
So, assuming that, is there any way for this nonprofit agency to remedy a situation? I mean, I think they can, exaggerated projections for 2021, that's probably in dispute. But whether or not they file a 990, that is an objective criteria. Is that something they can remedy, so that assuming they still need these funds and you have funds, that they can pursue the funds? Yeah,
so I think, so first off, just obviously, as I've indicated, this is a credit not available elsewhere program, so we take extraordinary lengths together, and I think it's appropriate for the public sector to, for example, originate loans with a 570 credit score, which of course in the private sector would be difficult to get. On this particular issue, though, on whether or not you filed, and the fact that the increase request that you were seeking is not supported by the tax information or the financial information that you provided, I believe that we need to draw the line there, and I've recommended to the administrator that that's what we do. And I guess the last thing I would say is there is no comparable process in the private sector for appeal or reconsideration. And I will say every time that I said yes when I was lending, and I lent $500 million to federal government contractors across the country, minority, women, veteran-owned, every time I said yes, I was the greatest banker in the history of the world. And the next day when I said no, I was the worst banker in the history of the world. So with regard to this particular nonprofit, then, the answer is no, because they didn't file. They either filed the 990 or they didn't. And if they didn't file it, this disallows their increased request. That's my conclusion. They just need to know one way or the other, I'd say. Yeah. Okay, so that's their situation. Certainly for a program that had been open well over a year at that point. In August of 2021, we made reforms to the RER Rapid portal to enable the district offices to have direct access and transparency to see whatever the loan officer or any other, processing employee in the PDC in Dallas-Fort Worth could see. That was really critical because it helped expedite casework for your offices, but it empowered them. And one of the mistakes prior to that was the fact that a person could pinball from the call center to the district office and back in an infinite loop. And that is deeply frustrating, and regrettable. In September, we switched call center vendors. Choices made at the outset proved to be really devastating across the span of time. In addition, the portal itself had a two-step process, which from a technology standpoint was inept, quite frankly. It required you to come in, fill out the application form in an intake, and then wait for a response. And in an emergency situation, as you guys have told me and I totally agree with, silence is deafening. And so if I'm waiting to be invited back into the portal and I don't know, I logically start a new application. Well, the system then detected that you were applying for two instances at the same time. So then, of course, you're now on the call center line, right? So again, there were choices made in 2020 from a speed standpoint and a design standpoint that created systemic issues that rippled forward. And it leads to this day because the constituency interactions that we receive are still trying to make heads or tails out of all these, disparate signals that we sent them. And that is horrible. And from Administrator Guzman's standpoint, it's never again. And so the Office of Capital Access is now charged with reforming, all of this in the core natural disaster programs. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and look forward to seeing more streamlined communication and process.
Yep.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
But in drafting the bipartisan infrastructure bill, Congress very clearly intended that SBA use transfer authority granted by that law to reallocate funds from targeted EIDL grant program to the EIDL loan program so that businesses who are eligible for that assistance would be able to receive it. Now, in the past, SBA has used that authority. Why was the decision made in this case not to use that authority again?
So as we've indicated to the committee, we did use that authority, for example, to process applications that were received on or before May 6th cutoff deadline. So we used both cancellations, which I think Chairman Cardin referenced, as well as funds that we moved in coordination with OMB into that fund. There's no question that communication from center-level personnel on an individual basis about funding being exhausted was confusing. However, when we speak to the inventory that we're talking about today, the 41,000, there aren't any instances that would be approved in obligated funds. Those files have been looked at. There has been communication to those borrowers about what was missing, what was insufficient, and in 2/3 of the cases, it is a tax-related issue. So at this point, we would not move funds because we don't see the inventory of demand. And again, the reason that's the case is 92% of that population has had a loan since 2020. And as of April of 2021, with the average increase being 200,000, they could seek a loan increase, and many did. But only 20% of those eligible for an increase ever responded over the course of 15, 16 months, roughly. So I understand, again, and I want to keep reiterating this, I understand why they are frustrated with the outcome. But in terms of the SBA's responsiveness to their petition for an increase, we have given them multiple, in some cases, reconsiderations or appeals, and we are not going to be able to get to yes on their individual file.
I appreciate the effort. I beg to differ on a list of applications that we have worked with our district office on. And while there are some, I don't want to use the word questions, but there are some disparities, but they are in, at least one case as simple as an email address that was different. So I guess you haven't convinced me that, and while I recognize that there are some cases that for various reasons, human error don't get reviewed in the same way that we would all like. I'm still concerned that we have businesses out there that qualify that are not being acknowledged by SBA. So I don't know how to resolve some of those cases, but I do think it's a concern, and it's an ongoing concern. And as Senator Rosen talked about trust, I think that is a real issue that many of our small businesses still have at this point.
I'm going to follow up on some of Senator Shaheen's point. I just want to acknowledge that we spent a lot of time together in developing these programs with Senator Rubio and Senator Collins. And we really did want to get money out quickly. And we recognized that the verification systems would be lax, because if we had to go through all the verification systems, the businesses would be shuttered and closed for good. So we knew that there was going to be some challenges in doing this when we created the program. I'm also going to follow up on some of Senator Shaheen's points about individuals that are not, they have followed the rules and they haven't gotten the clarity that you've given us today. Mm-hmm. But first, let me just point out on waste, fraud, and abuse, because I agree. Look, we wanted to get money out quickly. We didn't want to see any waste, fraud, or abuse, but we wanted to get money out quickly. And when you look at the size of the PPP program and the EIDL programs and the restaurant program and the sheltered venue program, the amount of fraud is very, very small. Mm-hmm. So let's be clear about that. We want to see it at 0%, but the percentages are very, very small. Mm-hmm. And under waste, fraud, and abuse or mistake, a lot of this is not fraud, as you pointed out, and we should recognize that small businesses do not have the same degree of capacity that large companies have, and at times mistakes are made. And they're not intended, and we have to correct that. But let's not call it fraud when it's not fraud. So I just really want to clarify those points and also compliment this administration for having much more transparency. We have gotten much more information. I know Senator Ernst might get a little upset about this. It wasn't a high bar to meet under the Trump administration because they just didn't make anything available to us. But we do appreciate the fact that it's been a much more open process under this administration. So now let me get to the main thrust of today's hearing. So it is clear that the SBA did send out communications saying that applications were being denied because of lack of resources. But as you have clarified today, that is not the case, correct?
Yes. In all of those instances, both of those messages, I believe, were communicated to the borrower.
So now we have 125,000 eligible small businesses that have been informed that they're entitled to receive additional loan money. And your testimony today is it's up to those applicants to get the documentation in order to complete the settlement of those loans.
It's up to any borrowers to close a loan. So they have to sign the note. They have to sign the ancillary documents to the note. So they're not providing any additional documentation for any approval or anything. What we are waiting to, so if you bought a house or remember the big closing table and the big stack, like that's what they've got to execute. So they just have not done that yet.
Yes, and, I just really want to emphasize what Senator Shaheen has said. We'll give you chapter and verse. I think we've already given you these cases. We have several that have come to my attention where that's not the case. Where the burden is on the SBA to complete the closing, not on the person. They have done that, and they're still waiting for their checks.
So there's yet another issue with what you just opened up. So I agree that but for the borrower agreeing to take the note, right? So like they have to sign to be the borrower. We're responsible for closing the loans in association with them. So for the 125,000, including with the district offices, we are executing the closing, and it's at the discretion of the borrower to execute that. And yes, we have seen from your office and others that there was confusion for those folks, right, who do have funding. And I want to reiterate again, their money is there. They can execute the closing, and we will assist them with that closing. Once they have executed the documents, the money goes on a schedule over to Treasury for the ACH into the designated bank account. There are issues with those bank accounts where the banks, where the account is located, are bouncing back our disbursements, and I don't know the exact reasons from each institution. One of the reasons that is cited most often is the opinion of the bank that commercial activity for this account is not recognized, and therefore they are flagging it as suspicious activity.
I understand exactly what you're saying, and I recognize that, and that's one of the points I think some of our colleagues have mentioned. There are better systems out there that would have dealt with this, and we're dealing with two agencies, Treasury and the SBA, and that's a challenge also. My plea to you is provide the leadership and resources to get these resolved. These are people that are frustrated. They need their money. In one case, it was the bank account only accepted checks up to a certain amount, and they had a higher check coming in, so they set up a separate account, and it took them forever, and they still haven't completed getting that routing into the system so the money actually could get there. You know, these are small businesses. They need help. So please resolve these issues, get the resources, and get it done. And they have been given inconsistent information over time. At one point, they thought the money wasn't there, and many of them were giving up. So please provide the services they need so we can get that 125,000 those that want to take out the loan, that they can complete the loan process and stop calling our offices. Would it be very helpful? So I appreciate if you would follow up on that.
Yes, and 100%, I hear you. 100%, we will redouble our efforts. And for all of those bank account bounce, just like the closing, we will work those to completion. So we will work with that particular borrower to get that money, and that money remains theirs even if it bounced back.
Now to the 41,000 potential that
we're
informed either directly or through communications generally that these loans are unworkable. Not that they were denied, but that they were unworkable, as I understand it. And I understand why that a lot of these, they could not get the verifications that are required. They hadn't filed their tax returns, all those issues that have to be done for them to be able to get their loans completed. I recognize that. But unworkable is not denied.
Sure.
And some of these, many of these, according to the casework notes that we have, they think that they have given the adequate information or that they can supply the adequate information, but they haven't gotten that ability to do that because of the way the system is set up. So I would just urge you, to those that do have claims that can be adjudicated in a positive way, either a reconsideration or an increased loan amount or whatever they have filed, let's try to get those resolved. And the numbers are getting small enough that it seems to me that we should be able to handle those with the type of service that we would expect from the SBA. So just urge us to try to resolve that. For those that are truly not eligible, you're going to have to bite the bullet and give them a determination so that they can move on or file an appeal. So it would seem to me you have to complete these. And I don't want any I don't want you to deny an application that has merit because you want to get it off the books. I'm happy to keep it open if there's a possibility for successful conclusion for the small business owner, but they need to know. There has to be a time.
Yep. So understood. I understand the urgency. I understand what the objective and the mission is. The one thing that I do want to make the chairman aware of and members is that from the point of first disbursement, a borrower has 24 months to seek a loan increase. So as of July, 80% of that universe told. So it's August 2nd today. So 80% of that universe can no longer seek a loan increase. By October, that number will be in excess of 90%, and by the end of the year, it'll be 0.
I just point out, I've been told that the 24-month period is not statutory. You can waive that 24 months if you wanted to.
Sure. I understand the note.
I need to get on the record so I understand. May 6th was the cutoff date for modifications, et cetera. It could have gone up to July, if I understand correctly, and you could have waived that date and made it later than that. And you put on your website May 6th as the date, quote, due to lack of available funding. We won't argue whether that when the judgment was made, you were rejecting how much monies would be available, et cetera. You made that judgment. But on the website today, it still says, as of May 6, 2022, SBA is no longer processing COVID-19 EIDL loan increase requests or requests for reconsideration of previously declined loan applications due to the lack of available funding. I would suggest that you may want to modify that, just take off that clause. You're not accepting them, fine. We recognize you've used that date. We may disagree with that. We can have that debate. But clearly funding is available now, and it's misleading to keep that on your website. Second point I would raise, you've indicated during your questioning here that, that most of the 41,000 will not be able to get to yes, and that there is a concern that the funding could be repurposed. We want to make sure that funding is not a reason for determination that is pending as of May the 6th.
Yeah, I apologize if I left that impression that I either misspoke or was not aware. I am keenly aware that that's an appropriations decision. It's a decision for OMB. My position, and I want to make this clear, is that these files were looked at, and I have seen them personally. I've been involved in the day-to-day correspondence, and that we have been responsive. And so I apologize for the confusion.
So no one will be denied who had their applications in prior to May 6th because of lack of funding.
Correct. The denials, the decisions, beginning with their initial denial for most of these instances, beginning way back in 2021, and at the heart of the denials is a disagreement between that particular person about whether or not filing taxes is appropriate or not. And I understand the frustration here, and I understand why that person, because they got the loan originally with no taxes. They didn't file, and they got a loan from the federal government in 2020. And so I understand why when they speak to people, including me, I receive emails where when I read the initial email, they acknowledge the back and forth with their particular loan officer. They acknowledge that there were some shortcomings at first. Then they say, but a wrong has been done to them. And I came back to serve to say yes. So that appeals to me, as I'm sure it does you and all the members. We're here to serve. Right. And so we then take action, and we work with the civil servants in the process centers to determine whether or not we can make an action.
I just want to make it clear that any of the pending applications, if they are meritorious, they'll be funded. The money is there, that the funds are there. We'll save for another debate at another time whether you had to use that May 6th date because of lack of funding. I, quite frankly, don't agree with that. I think you could have gone beyond May 6th, that the funding was available, and that you have the discretion even to go beyond July of this year if you wanted to, under the authority to waive the 24 months. We'll leave that for another debate for another time, but it is clear that Congress intended EIDL to have adequate funds to deal with the COVID pandemic, and we were prepared to make funds available. It seems like a lot of the funds that we specifically made available for specific purposes have been taken for other purposes, not necessarily on the EIDL program, but on other programs, and we could have repurposed money to be able to take care of all the needs that are out there. We're not going to, I want to make sure we take care of the 41,000 and the 125,000, but it seems to me we could have had a longer off-ramp on this, on the applications for increased funds. Senator Ernst, anything further?
I am good. Thank you.
We very much appreciate your time and your explanations and your service to our country. You have a very challenging job, so thank you very much, and thank you for appearing before the committee. The committee record will remain open, I believe, for 2 weeks, which is our normal process, for friendly questions that may be asked to you for the record. I'd appreciate if you would answer those questions as quickly as possible. And with that, the committee will stand adjourned. Thank you.